We are going to install some Ross-Courtney terminals. These are the Ross-Courtney terminals. You'll find these on fuse boxes and other places on pre-war Rolls-Royce and Bentleys. So you start off by removing the covering. About 7/8 of an inch is a good amount. Then, if this is a wire that gets a wire marker, these little sleeves, for instance, this one is 3B, and on a Phantom 3, that is for the ignition system, the B side ignition. So you put your little marker on like that. Then you bend the wire, you put it down nice and tight. Then you bend the wire 90 degrees. Then you use a number 1 drill bit, and you form the wire around that to make sort of a question mark shaped loop, like such. You put the crown of your terminal in place, and a lot of times I like to use a block to sort of hold things in place. Then a washer. Then I have this mandrel to hold it down, squish everything down, and then you bend down the prongs. Mandrel's somewhat in the way at first, but you can work it around and get it started. Then you can go back and bend them a little bit more. Once you have them bent down far enough, you can go back again with your mandrel and just seat it in a little bit, very lightly. You can also use a pair of like duck nose pliers and give them a little tweak down. So you want to make sure it's on nice and cleanly, and that there isn't anything interfering in the center hole. And that's how it works. Now this is one of the smaller gauge wires. The thicker gauge wires are a little bit different, and a different tactic for those, and I'll show you how that is. So we'll do this one. This is the T wire, and for a Phantom 3 that's for the starter teaser. So let me show you my technique for that. Again, we go about 7/8 of an inch. And if you're wondering how much 7/8 of an inch is that much. Don't ask me how I have these uncanny abilities with these measurements, but I guess it's just from doing too much machining over the years. You'll notice that this modern wire is cloth covered and it's PVC under the cloth, which is kind of the best of both worlds. You get the look of the cloth and the protection of the PVC. So again, this is the T. So we have our little T wire marker. We'll put that over. Sometimes you'll find that the hole in the middle of these markers isn't big enough. So you may have to increase it. Using a little Dremel is probably your best bet. You have to be very careful with these because they're very fragile and they are very difficult to get. Another thing I like to do with these ferrules is the ones on the fuse box side tend to be not as nice as the ones in condition wise as the ones that have been in the master switch area. Now this gauge wire is a little smaller than I had thought, so I'm going to do it the way we did the last one. So anyway, I'll switch them around. I'll use the really nice, pretty, good condition ones on the fuse box side where they're more likely to be seen, and then the ones that aren't quite as nice I will put in the for the master switch, which are concealed. So again, we get our shape like that. 7/8 might be a little much, so we'll just trim a little off. Sometimes you need to go back and shape a little bit more. Take our crown. Now on the car, in most cases, it's difficult to use the block. So then you have to use needle nose pliers and other ways to bend over the prongs. Oops. So yeah, this wire is a little bit bigger in gauge than the other one, so just takes a little bit more time to okay. So now we have the T on. All right, so I better do a heavier gauge wire. So this one looks pretty heavy here, because that is I handle that quite differently. These you might want to go a little more than 7/8, maybe more like 15/16 or so. Okay, this one is 10. Let me look on my diagram here. So yeah, 10. And then we should have a red marker 10 somewhere. Maybe this car was missing that. Yeah, unfortunately it was. So what I'll do is I'll show you whipping. The whipping is used when they didn't use those little plastic ferrules. So we evenly split the wire strands. Oops. That happens once in a while. You just don't want it to happen too often. So evenly split them. Then we shape each one around the number 1 drill bit. Like this. And we have this sort of shape. Then we cut the excess off. A lot of times we lose our shape again. So now we have our shape ready to accept the crown. So now I'm doing it this way. We're not sacrificing the ability of the wire because we're still using the same amount of strands. We just divided them up at the terminal. But yet we can get all those strands into the terminal. And it still can be a little bit of a pinch in there, but so yeah, so there we have it. We have a nicely installed Ross-Courtney terminal. So my tape here is a little bit in the way. So I'm going to take that off and show you about whipping. And hopefully you don't think I'm doing something inappropriate, but or teaching you something inappropriate, because I'm not. So I use a Kevlar thread. It has a pretty good color. Being that it's good and strong, You can tug on it a bit, not have to worry about it breaking. So this I'm going to try to do as slowly as possible with as much detail as possible. It's kind of in the way. So we take our wire like this, and I like to have the prong side facing up. Then we take the strand, we place it like this, hold it with our thumb, and we make a loop like this, and then you begin to wrap. A little bit of a redo there. So we wrap. You want to make sure that the wraps aren't going to overlap, that they're nicely spaced, they're right up against each other. And you just wrap right along, and you take it all the way up to the terminal. And you want to put on just enough. You don't want to add too much. Then you put your end through this loop. And then you draw in the loop. And you can pull on both sides to really get it good and taut. And sometimes you gotta kind of push it up a little bit on the ends there. So you make sure they're good and taut. Cut off the extra. The Kevlar thread comes from a McMaster car. Originally it was a lot brighter yellow, but I've had this around the shop for a few years, and it's toned down to a really nice shade. Now what I like to do to finalize it is to put a little clear nail polish on, just to keep things sticking together and less likely to unravel. I'm sure they put some sort of a lacquer or something over these when they originally did them. So there we have our whipped terminal. And I'll show you an example of some originals. Just to give you an idea of how they looked. Here. I will confess that their thread was a lot thinner a lot of times. But I think it does a good job of getting the appearance right. So anyway, these are 3BA terminals, and I showed you the two different ways that I do that with the different gauge wires. Sometimes with these smaller gauges, you need to double up on the backing washers, or even triple, because the thinness of the wire doesn't always take up all the space in the crown. You also have larger size and different size Ross-Courtney terminals, and they go on very much using the same method, except you'd use something bigger than a #1 drill. The reason why it's nice to use the original Ross-Courtney terminals is because they fit so much nicer in the fuse box panel. I mean, it's what they were really made for. They stay on really, really well. To me, these are garbage. I know that they're approved by NASA and NASCAR and lots of other organizations, but these are a very much more superior terminal than these. So when people use these, you know, it just doesn't look right. They're not as good. The thinness doesn't look right, and so, you know, you saw it didn't take all that long to put these on, and it's well worth doing. So I do encourage you to think in those terms and not get frustrated with the idea. So I think it took me something like 10 minutes or so. Let me see if I can see on the camera to put on these terminals. Yeah, maybe like 10-15 minutes. So if it takes you, yeah, once you get on a roll, you can probably get a terminal on in like a minute or 2 minutes, and that's not a big deal. So, and these are just some of the wire markers. And again, these were the ones that were on the fuse box side, so they aren't as nice as the ones that were inside the master switch housing. So here's a old master switch. It looked like it had been out in the weather, and so these don't look all that nice on this one. But let me see if I have a nice sample one here. Oh, so I can get these over here. But yeah, so see how much nicer these look. So yeah, so these are going to be the ones that I'm going to use on the fuse box side. Now they only use these marking sleeves on the master switch wires mostly. So that would be the top row on most of the pre-war cars. That would be the top row. Is that top? No, this is top. I'm sorry. So that'd be the top. So these are going to have the nice markers, and then these tend to be whipped on the bottom. But that's not necessarily a strict rule. And also, not all wires that had Ross-Courtney terminals were whipped. So if you're really a purist and you're really wondering about that, there were some that had this it's like a friction tape or something, and you're going to see this more in the later pre-war cars, perhaps Wraith, Phantom 3. I've also seen like these little natural rubber sleeves on Wraiths, pre-war Wraith, and so yeah. So that's about all I have to say about 3BA Ross-Courtney terminals. If I come across something that needs to be explained further about Ross-Courtney terminals, I certainly will include another video on that. Oh, here's another interesting fact. Ross-Courtney ad. And in it says you can use these without solder. But quite a few times I've taken wiring out of Rolls-Royces and later ones, Phantom 3s, Wraiths, and sometimes they had been soldered. So I guess Rolls-Royce just didn't want to listen to Ross-Courtney.